today's episode is inspired by Valentine's Day because Netflix just released a new movie called La Dolce Villa, and that immediately got my attention. I have to say, these movies are always fun for me to watch. I love seeing how Italy and Italians are represented in international media, international pieces of entertainment. So today I'm going to share the fun with you and break down a few of the things in La Dolce Villa that made me say, oh my God, that's actually so true. And others that maybe were not so true, but the movie didn't do so bad from that point of view, I have to say. And don't worry, I'm keeping this spoiler free or as spoiler free as I can because I still need to give you some example, right? So let's see what La Dolce Villa can tell us about modern Italy. Italy is one of the most iconic countries in the world. But what does Italy mean to the world? What does it mean to you?
Buongiorno.
Pizza.
Ciao Bella.
Michelangelo.
Spaghetti.
Mafia. Dolce Vita.
My name is Alessia, I'm Italian, and this is Voices of Italy, the podcast that peels back the layers of the Instagram perfect Italy to reveal everyday stories of authentic, surprising, and messy Italian life. Okay, let's start with a little premise here. As I said, I'm gonna have to give you some examples and mention some scenes here and there. So, no, it's not gonna be completely spoiler free, but in my defense, this is a very pleasant, lighthearted movie. We're talking about really perfect for a lazy Valentine's Day evening or whenever you feel hopelessly romantic. The plot isn't exactly the most complex, so I doubt that anything I'm gonna say today in this episode is gonna ruin the movie for you. So I'm not gonna mention anything that you couldn't see from the trailer or that you couldn't really predict from a romantic movie like this. But I have to say, while I'm not a huge fan of romantic stories, the movie delivers exactly what it promises: a sweet, simple, light-hearted romance story. And honestly, I didn't really hate it. But the episode is not about the movie in itself. This is not a review or anything like that. It's not about reviewing the movie. Instead, what I really wanted to do is taking inspiration from the movie itself to tell you some things about Italy that are really based on daily life, that are part of the culture, and sometimes they become a little cliche and stereotypes that the movie actually plays with. The whole point of this episode is to um, see the movie through the lenses of an Italian person, and I really want to comment it as if I was watching the movie with you in a way. So this is the spirit of the episode. And to be fair, compared to other foreign movies that are set in Italy or that involve maybe Italian characters, La Dolce Villa isn't really the worst offender. Let's say that they maybe couldn't resist romanticizing Italians and Italy and Italian lifestyle in general a little bit, but I guess that's the inevitable part of the marketing that comes with it. But in general, yes, the movie was a really good source of inspiration for today's podcast. Let's get it started. So, for the list of clichés, stereotypes, or simply facts about Italy that we can learn from La Dolce Villa, let's start with the backbone of Italian society: old people. No, jokes aside, three of the recurring characters of the movie are these three old ladies that are always sitting in the same spot in that little town, the imaginary little town where the movie is set. They know everyone, they gossip, they're curious, they stare at you. That's true in the movie as much as it is in real life, especially in small town, of course, but I can tell you that you can find the same behavior also in bigger cities, maybe just in a different way, in the sense that obviously they don't have as many of those little spaces that they used to go every single day to sit and chat and stare at people, but you can find it really anywhere. That's definitely a good way to show that side of Italian society. The elderly in Italy are sort of the neighborhood watch, and that's even more the case, as I was saying, in small towns. They know everybody's business, they see everything, and they will talk about everything and everybody the way they please. They have that I don't care attitude a lot of times. I'm too old to care. That's sort of how it works.
Parla italiano. Male. Roma non l'hanno mica costruita in un giorno.
Erik, the protagonist of the movie, often asks them for advice. And that's a good call, because if there's a stereotype that you might want to believe, is that the grandmas always know better. And even if they don't, you're not allowed to say otherwise. There is this sort of matriarchal approach with older women in Italy. We actually have that sort of high respect for older women and what they say. And the movie definitely does justice to the role of, shouldn't say maybe older people in general, but in particular older women in Italian society, their wisdom and knowledge. And if you watch the movie until the end, you will realize how important the role is, even for the plot of the movie. That I'm gonna just not say it, because I appreciated the little scene where they actually had an important involvement in the story. The only little thing in the movie that maybe, okay, you're not going to see it so easily, don't expect that to be the case, is the drinking. There's this little scene where we find out that one of the other characters is related to one of the old ladies, and he sort of goes and has aperitivo with the older ladies. And while Italians in general enjoy aperitivo and wine, older generations, especially in small towns, again, don't usually drink that much, not in any occasion anyway. Aperitivo, it's sort of a more recent trend on a national level. And in general, you're more likely to see an elderly person drinking espresso at 6 a.m. in a bar than anyone over 40 years old having aperitivo.
È simpatico, no? È americano.
The second topic is stereotypes, but not about Italians, stereotypes about Americans. Because, yes, as shown in the movie, a lot of Italians always make jokes, or in general, talk about Americans as a bit odd, maybe, and as if they just don't get real food. That's a kind of comment that is very normalized. As I said in another episode before, my boyfriend is American, and that's something that he hears all the time as well. Comments implying that he doesn't really know real food because he comes from the States. So that's definitely realistic in the movie and in real life. You know, sometimes people can also have a little bit of an arrogant attitude, unfortunately, but there are little nods to this stereotype, like the character referring to Erik as l'americano. There is this little scene, in fact, where Francesca, the mayor, which is the romantic interest of the protagonist, just says, "È simpatico, eh?" So he's a funny guy. And the man that she's talking to, Bernardo, just replies, "È americano, he's American," as if that already defines him in his attitude and in his behavior. Maybe in that specific case, in that scene, that comment is related to the fact that Erik just bought frozen pizza, while Bernardo is clearly judging him for eating frozen pizza instead of eating in any pizzeria around there. I had to say, Bernardo, let's talk about the character of Bernardo, because I found it really, really interesting as a character. Okay, he's quite annoying, but that's his purpose in the movie because of his negativity. And obviously, if you watched or you will watch the movie, you will see that he's also sort of the villain at a certain point in the little romantic plot happening. But actually represent a lot of very realistic traits of Italians. As I was saying before, Italians love to joke that Americans just don't get real food, and don't understand good quality ingredients. This is tied to the idea that everything in the US is ultra processed, oversized, really full of fat and unhealthy chemicals or whatever. And Bernardo makes similar comments in another scene when Erik is talking about the fantastic meal him and his daughter just had at the local trattoria, the local restaurant. And Bernardo says, "Congratulations, you have enjoyed real pasta," immediately. And in that same scene, Bernardo dismisses Erik really quickly when Erik proposes the idea of opening a cooking school in the villa that they are purchasing. And the first comment Bernardo makes is, "But who will teach in this school? Surely not Americans, come on." And all of a sudden, you realize that he's implying cooking school with Americans teaching. That makes no sense. What do they know about food? And I wanted to mention a concept that is not explicitly mentioned in the movie, but it's sort of portrayed, and it's the idea of the Americanata. This word is used by Italians to describe things that are created or made popular from the United States, and they are usually exaggerated, over the top, sort of classless. Think absurdly large cars, giant food portions, a 10-liter coffee cup, or stuff like that, really exaggerated stuff that only Americans can do. That's what the word Americanata means. And again, to come back to the idea that, oh, Americans don't understand Italian food or high quality food, there's this other scene in the movie where Erik is making fettuccine alfredo for Giovanni, another character that is essentially the ideal Italian romantic interest. But we'll come back to Giovanni a little later. And Giovanni, seeing the dish that Erik is preparing for him, just says, "Italian food should not be beige," which in itself, I'm going to be like, "Giovanni, Giovanni, Giovanni, what about burro e salvia? What about cacio e pepe?" Those are two perfectly traditional, well-known Italian loved dishes that are beige because they're essentially made of cheese. But anyway, letting this comment aside, then of course Erik is super apologetic. He's like, "I know this is not how Italians cook it," but anyway, he serves this fettuccine alfredo, and this is how Giovanni reacts.
The fettuccine alfredo is not too bad. But I will deny ever saying it.
The reason why I am mentioning and I'm giving so much attention to fettuccine alfredo in particular is that it's very social media popular lately. I have noticed, I've seen people debating about fettuccine alfredo on social media. It's a pasta dish that simply includes butter and parmigiano cheese. That's the original recipe, was created in Rome, I think, in the early 20th century. However, in the movie, the comments refer to the version of the recipe that is now popular in the States, on social media, in other countries outside Italy as well, where, there are other ingredients such as chicken, shrimps, broccoli that are also added. And that's the version that probably Erik is referring to in the movie to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I know this is not how Italians do it," because the Italian version, again, only has two ingredients, but that's what it looks like he's preparing. So I was confused. I was like, "You're doing it perfectly right. It's just Giovanni that is being a little picky here." But they probably just didn't dare putting the American revised version of the recipe in the movie. And now let's talk about languages. Let's start with the incredible, excellent English fluency that basically almost every character, except for the three old ladies that I was mentioning before, have in the movie. I'm really sorry to say this, to bring this hard truth to you, Americans watching this movie, but the widespread high level English fluency you see in La Dolce Villa is basically fantasy, sci fi. While younger Italians have a better grasp of English today, in small towns you'll barely find any basic English speakers, unfortunately. This is something that obviously is very useful for the movie because otherwise it would simply be a movie between an American dude and a bunch of Italians that don't speak English trying to understand each other's. So I perfectly understand why that was made in the movie, but still, the fact that almost everyone in the movie speaks English with just a cute Italian accent is incredibly unrealistic, especially for the locals like the renovator or the geometra. I swear I've never seen someone with that job having a good English in a small town, because again, in bigger cities maybe it makes sense because you could find people that for their jobs were required to learn some basic English. But it's slightly more realistic, that very, very initial scene where Erik is helping a woman carrying her baby in the stroller up the station stairs, and she's like, what? What are you saying? Well, that you're helping, so fine, let's go. That's pretty much how people will react if you just go and speak fluent English to them. But speaking of languages, let's talk about Italian. In the movie, Italian speakers are also quite unrealistic in there. The movie is set in a small town in Tuscany, but the Italian you hear is just too perfect, too clean. It's what I call movie Italian. In reality, Tuscany has a very distinct dialect and accent and pronunciation that in small towns you will hear even more strongly. But I, again, completely understand why they didn't go for accuracy in this case. Hearing locals speaking pure Tuscany dialect would have been super confusing for some Italians as well, so let alone an international audience. So that's fine. We forgive you.
I was busy working. I tutored English in Milan. I nannied in Florence. I spent some time harvesting olives. Then a couple weeks ago, I was on the way to a wine festival gig. I got on the wrong train by accident and ended up here.
Let's move on to one other aspect of the movie that was definitely not so realistic. And again, the spirit of this episode is not to judge or criticize the movie simply because the movie doesn't take itself so seriously, and you shouldn't do so either. But I just wanted to highlight that what I find the most unrealistic is really none of the what we have mentioned so far, but it's how the movie sort of mentions the job market in Italy, particularly when it comes to Olivia, which is Eric's daughter and lives in Italy for a while. We don't know exactly how long or how she got there. I don't expect the movie, obviously, to tell us exactly what kind of visa she's on and stuff like that. But all we know is that she's a foreigner in this small Tuscany town, and she says to her dad, as you heard in the clip, that she managed to find multiple jobs in her Italian experience so far. That's already kind of miraculous. I want to be like, Olivia, how did you do that? Give me your tips. Um, Job hunting in Italy is quite difficult, especially for young people, and even more so for foreigners. She mentioned tutoring in Milan, nannying in Florence, working in a fair. Yes, it's not unrealistic in itself that a young person could find these kind of jobs in a bigger city. Uh, but as a foreigner, being hired so many times in different places, it's really something that unfortunately you don't see happening in reality. Something that really, guys, just made me laugh is when she mentions that she also had a job harvesting olives. What do you mean? Harvesting olives? I get that to some foreigners, working in touch with nature sounds romantic, but let me tell you, it's hard work and it pays almost nothing. There's a reason why we have a huge problem in Italy called caporalato. We could do a little episode dedicated just to that because essentially refers to that situation that is closer to slavery than it is to employment in the agricultural industry. In Italy, there's essentially a lot of really low pay workers. A lot of them are foreigners, but are not the kind of foreigner that we see in the movie. It's usually, people from poorer countries, definitely not from the United States, because again, that kind of job is paid almost nothing. It's one of those jobs in richer countries like Italy that unfortunately only the people in the most need end up doing. So I want to say very clearly, if you're hoping to come to Italy to live here doing a job like that, sorry, that's probably not going to happen unless you can buy a house that has some olive trees and you just do that on your own in your little piece of land. That's fine. But I'm really just saying, don't count on make a living like Olivia harvesting olives. Another example in the movie is Giovanni, the charming Italian guy that I was mentioning before. He's a local chef and restaurant owner. He says that he grew up in Rome, and then because he wanted to have his own restaurant, moved to Montezara, this little imaginary town where the movie's set. And that's already something that in real life would make me ask a lot of questions. You really move from a bigger city, which is one of the very few where realistically you can have some opportunities for your business in Italy, to a small town that would probably not happen. It's more realistic, probably the scene where Olivia, spoiler alert here, gets hired for an apprenticeship after being referred by Nino, who is the constructor in the movie. That's definitely a more realistic way to find a job in Italy. Get some friends, get them to like you, and they're probably going to refer you at some point to somebody else that is going to give you a job.
Small towns are selling old houses for €1 to bring new people in. The mayor was telling me all about the whole scheme.
At least you admit it's a scheme.
Now let's talk about this famous €1 house scheme, as Erik calls it in the movie. Well, it actually exists and it seems to be really, really popular. In the movie, Erik's daughter, Olivia, buys this villa for €1, even though they pretty soon say, of course, that the deal involves a €5,000 deposit that will be refunded after the restoration work is done. And this is based on a real public initiative in Italy that was essentially a way to bring more people in small abandoned towns where young people massively live. And the whole €1 initiative is exactly designed to address this kind of problem. Obviously, in reality, it's quite harder and more complicated than how it's showed in the movie. Of course, this is Olivia's dream, and there are some obstacles here and there, but it's quite easy in general, and most importantly, it's quite fast in the movie. In real life, these houses are usually in terrible condition, and the buyer, as shown in the movie, is required to invest money in the restoration. But usually we're talking about thousands, often tens of thousands of euros in renovation. Essentially, the buyers have to present this detailed renovation plan, complete the work within a certain time frame. In some case, they have to provide a financial deposit, like in Olivia's case in the movie, as a guarantee. So yes, the deal exists, but it's not really buy a house for €1 and live your best life in Italy kind of situation. It's more like buying a restoration project with a huge bureaucratic process attached. The reason why the €1 initiative can happen is because there's usually a lot of these abandoned houses that are privately owned. The owners maybe got them from family members, but they don't live in those small towns anymore, and often want to get rid of them to not to pay the taxes that are due, and probably they simply don't have any use for those houses. So they give to the local municipality the possibility to sell the houses with the symbolic cost of €1, or sometimes slightly more. I'm not sure why. But at the end of the day, in general, The movie, I have to say, did a pretty good job representing the initiative as something that, yes, small towns are very eager to move forward with. And at the same time, though, there's a lot of stuff to keep in consideration: the deposit, the permits, and they also mentioned a little bit of that recommendation game that is usually involved in these cases. What I just said straight up leads to the next topic, which is something that is not explicitly mentioned or shown or even misrepresented in the movie. I really wouldn't expect so, because the movie is not supposed to be really serious. But there is an undertone in La Dolce Villa that hints at what we call raccomandazione. That word simply translates in English as referral, but the connotation in Italian is slightly different. The Italian system of using connections to get things done, to get what you want done, instead of using the proper way, it's sort of what the word raccomandazione usually refers to. So it's not obviously super positive most of the time. And in the movie, again, there is no outright corruption. The movie is very family friendly and politically correct. You can just see those little things here and there hinting at it. In particular, when there are scenes that refer to the permits for Olivia's house, and Bernardo, the local geometra, guarantees that he can easily pull the permits as long as Francesca behaves as he like, essentially. Even if the house is not even in the official list of the €1 program, Bernardo says that he's happy to help to make things move forward. I'm not going to spoiler too much, but at a certain point, we found out that Bernardo failed to get the permits. So simply, Francesca, as mayor of the town, effortlessly secures the permits and the approvals for Olivia's renovation by just making a few calls. So not by really ensuring or getting the professional, in this case Bernardo, to actually approve, but just by asking some favors here and there, which is something that is normalized so much that in the movie obviously is not intended to be shown as negative. She just knows everybody, she's the mayor, she makes a few calls, boom boom, things are done. But these scenes still capture a reality that in Italy, knowing the right people, especially in the right roles in public administration, usually gives you a little more opportunities to open some doors for you and for your interest, certainly faster than going through the official proper channels. And I know certain things happen anywhere, really. I don't think any human community has zero corruption, but this is something that unfortunately is very real in Italy and affects the country and our society a lot, especially when it comes to job market and businesses. It's something that any Italian, I guess, would be able to tell you. It certainly has a little bit of an impact overall in the country. Let's finish up with something that, yes, is a cliche, and it's essentially the base for the whole movie, which is Italians are charming and flirty, especially Italian men. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Italians cannot be warm and expressive. On the contrary, it's just that obviously every Italian man is not straight out of a rom-com like our chef Giovanni in the movie. So this is my friendly reminder to the foreign girls out there expecting to come in Italy and find copies of Giovanni here and there. Sorry, guys. Sorry, guys. Giovanni is really a little bit of a exaggerated kind of character. The charming character portrayed as flirty all the time, is at times even too cheesy and makes me smile. Sounds like it's straight up from a soap opera. Let's be clear again. I'm not saying that flirty, passionate, romantic Italian men do not exist. This is not an exact science. I don't have the stats here to tell you that. I'm just coming to you with my direct and indirect experience as a 31 years old Italian woman. And my opinion is definitely Italians don't flirt so hard. Even Francesca, again, the romantic interest of the protagonist, she, in my opinion, also is a little bit unrealistic in this sense. It might sound pessimistic, but a female mayor being so openly flirty in front of the whole town with a never seen before American man, I think it just would not happen. In general, I just think it would be so much gossip that the poor woman would just not do it. If anything, she would definitely be a little bit more private. To be fair, even Erik in the movie says that it must not be easy to be a female mayor around here, and he's right. Francesca even confirms and says that being a woman in that position makes getting things done a little harder, because when it comes to women, to be honest, I feel like in Italy, unfortunately, we can be a little bit more judgmental, especially when women have some sort of authority or role. But in the movie, it's really a lovely circumstance and it's completely enjoyable. So I'm happy that they decided to portray it that way, to be honest. Okay, let's wrap up this episode with 5 extra facts that you can find in the movie that are absolutely true, but that are too briefly mentioned or shown for me to give you more. Italians drink coffee at the bar, literally at the bar, al banco. So standing up, not sitting, and having their little cup of coffee, of espresso, while having a quick chat with other people in there. Young people are leaving. Yes, this is something that Francesca mentions in the movie. I giovani stanno tutti andando via. And it is the reason why she's so worried about the €1 initiative, why she feels like it's so important to bring new people in the town to make sure that the town survives, moves on, and grows. And unfortunately, that is true. As I was saying before, a lot of young people, especially in the South, but it's a general trend that happens mostly in small towns, to move in bigger cities. And while that's common in many countries, many societies, in Italy, it's a particularly significant phenomenon. And a lot of times they don't simply move to a bigger city in Italy, but they go abroad, which is resulting now in a huge diaspora of young people for Italy. And that's probably going to be a topic for another episode. The double kiss. Italians say hi with a double kiss on the cheeks. I mean, it's not really a kiss, it's more of a mwah, like you don't always make your lips touch people's face. But yeah, that's basically how we always say hi to each other, even to people that we don't know very well. That's just a polite way to say hi. Il dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing. That's a real phrase that is mentioned by Francesca in the movie. And yes, it sort of refers to how nice, sweet, good it feels to simply do nothing and enjoying that you have nothing to do. Geometra is a uniquely Italian job. I quickly mentioned it earlier, but I found it really funny when I realized a few years ago that it's a type of job that doesn't really have a translation in English. This is a person that is in charge of, things like filing paperwork with local authorities, addressing any objection, ensuring that all the necessary approvals are obtained when it comes to purchasing land or a property. Basically, a geometer is some sort of fusion between a land surveyor and an architect, but is also a little bit of an expert when it comes to the laws for lands and purchasing property. So it's a fundamental professional figure in Italy because of how complicated our bureaucracy is. So this is the person that takes care of that aspect whenever you want to buy property. And this is all for today's episode. It was really, really fun to prepare because, again, I find super fascinating to see how Italy is talked about in international media. And I'm so curious to know about you, your experience. Do you have a story about an Italian stereotype that turned out to be true or terribly false? Is there a particular cliche or aspect of Italian culture that you'd like to hear about in future episodes? If you're Italian, is there anything that you saw in the movie or that you heard in this episode that sounds particularly true to you or particularly not true? Reach out on Instagram, X, or Blue Sky at Voices of Italy and let me know. Let me know about you, your experience, and what you thought about this episode. And if you like this episode, follow the podcast and leave a comment or a review to help the podcast grow. Grazie mille, everyone. See you in the next episode.